The Skull Valley Indian Reservation is located on the southeastern edge of the western Utah Desert, just 75 miles southwest of Salt Lake City in Skull Valley, Utah. The reservation is home to 30 members of the Skull Valley Band of Goshute Indians and has been a landmark in the history of nuclear militarism in Utah. Both the federal government and nuclear industry have treated this sacred land of the Goshute people as a desolate, uninhabitable void, fit only for toxic industry and the disposal of nuclear waste. But Skull Valley is far from uninhabited. The Goshute people lived in the desert landscape for over 1,000 years prior to contact with Anglo-American settlers. They survived in the most arid climate on the continent by creating a very fragile ecological balance between the capacity of the land and the needs of the people to survive. However, when settlers, Mormons, and government agents began to encroach upon the land and resources of the Goshutes in the 1850s, this equilibrium was destroyed. The Goshutes fought to defend these resources, and as a result, the United States Army began to attack and kill the Goshute tribe, and forced survivors to sign a peace treaty that the government would not ultimately uphold. Under this treaty, the Goshutes allowed for construction on their land, and in exchange, the federal government would pay the Goshutes $1,000 per year as compensation. In the end, the Goshutes were not compensated. They were forced onto a reservation and were left impoverished and vulnerable to future military exploits of the land. Which leads to the Dugway Proving Grounds, a 740,000-acre test site for chemical warfare that is located roughly 10 miles away from the Goshute Reservation. The military tested toxic agents, chemical sprays, anthrax, and missiles, which began to further devastate and contaminate the ecology of Skull Valley. Birds, cattle, sheep, and rodents became infected with disease and died. In 1968, 6,400 sheep were found dead after a malfunctioning nozzle on a passing fighter jet sprayed VX nerve agent over Skull Valley. The government disposed of the toxic carcasses, many of which belonged to Goshute herds, in mass graves at undisclosed locations on the reservation. The western desert of Utah is home to many toxic industries, including the Deseret Chemical Depot, the Utah Test and Training Range, the Windover Bombing Range, and the MagCorp Magnesium Chloride Plant, all of which closely surround Skull Valley, and with no opportunity for alternative economic development, the Skull Valley Band of Goshutes turned to nuclear industry to bring money into the community. In 1996, a single leader of the Goshute tribe signed a lease with a nuclear utility coalition called Private Fuel Storage. The lease promised 840 acres of land on the reservation to be used to store 44,000 tons of nuclear waste for 20 years in exchange for an undisclosed amount of money that was speculated to be at or above $3 billion. The Nuclear Regulation Commission, a federal agency, approved the license to dump in Skull Valley and stated that the facility would not be considered as an environmental injustice, given that enough money was provided to allow tribal members to move if they did not like the nuclear waste dump. Both the federal government and nuclear industry have targeted Indian communities in order to bribe economically and politically vulnerable people like the Goshute Indians. In 1987, the government contacted every federally recognized tribe in an attempt to find a host for a high-level nuclear waste site. Of the hundreds of tribes that were approached, dozens agreed. Luckily, in 2012, the license for the Skull Valley Nuclear Storage Facility was canceled after the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs and U.S. Bureau of Land Management refused to approve the license and the project stalled. Today, the reservation has a very ghostly air. To step into the reservation is to feel like a trespasser of race and entitlement. The legacy of American militarism will remain buried forever among the bones of ancestral people who were killed by the government and among the unmarked graves of chemical warfare. And one can only hope that nuclear waste will never be buried there as well. I think that this site explores the nature of where and why nuclear militarism exists and the prejudices that determine who nuclear militarism most directly affects.